So are people coming on or?
Yeah, we have 32 participants right now in the webinar. And so we could give folks a few more minutes if you like, and maybe start at, 5 after. It's 2 minutes after 4 currently.
Okay, so we can't see people?
I think, can you see the bar at the bottom of your screen? Where you have your video icon, and then in the center it should say participants, Q&A, share screen. So if you click on participants, it'll give you a list of panelists, and then you can click over onto the right top feature that says attendees, and then you can see the attendees.
Oh.
If you click onto the Q&A box, you'll be able to see questions as they come in.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. So, Caitlin, why don't you give us the go-ahead whenever you think that people have been admitted and it's slowing down?
Well, we're at 36 right now. It's been about the same for probably the last minute.
Okay, why don't we get going then? Okay. All right, so welcome everybody. I can't see you. It's not like a typical Zoom, I guess, is this webinar approach, but I'm John Haschak, 3rd District Supervisor, and we're having this meeting to talk about what are our options with the Local Jurisdiction Assistant Grant Program. Okay, and this was brought up at the board meeting on Tuesday, and sorry about the quick turnaround, but we're under this time crunch. So my thing was we needed to have public input because it's not fair to have this $18 million grant and just have staff responsible for it. It should be a community-driven approach. So anyway, we're here to kind of talk about what the options are, and we want feedback. Okay, so let's see, here we have an agenda. We're gonna go over the timeline for this grant, and then eligible uses, ineligible uses, and specific uses, and then have a discussion with the public. Okay, and so anyway, moving on, let's see. How to participate in this meeting. During the meeting, attendees can type their questions into the Q&A box located at the bottom of their screen. Okay, you all know how to do that, hopefully. Time will be made for comments and questions. And when we get the comments, please type, "I'd like to make a comment" in the Q&A box. And then if you want to just make your comment orally, you can do that. So, and if you're calling in and not on the Zoom app, you can raise your hand during comments by pressing number 9 or *9. And if you're calling in and need to unmute your phone during comments, you can press *6. All right. And with any discussion, we'll be civil, and we, hopefully we can answer all the questions you have and take comments, because we really want this to be, comments and suggestions and productive, constructive input into this grant application. Because, where I come from the public school, Willits Public Schools, $18 million is 1 year of funding for the entire school district. So it's a lot of money, and we need to use it properly. We need to use it so we can get from where we are with most everyone in the provisional licensure to the annual license. And that's what the state's commitment is. They're committing over $100 million for this program. $18 million for Mendocino County, and they're committed to it. And we need to be committed to it and make sure that what we're doing gets people to that annual licensure. So here's the timeline. It started here. We're right here at October, 6th, 7th. We're the 7th. Okay, so you can see, and so within this, that we're supposed to bring it back to the board on October 26th. And so to get it to the board on the 26th, the grant proposal needs to be into the clerk of the board's office by next Tuesday or so. And so that's what we're going for. It's, that's a timeline we're working with right now. Okay. And then we'll see what happens in December and moving on. Okay, so Kristen's going to go over the eligible and ineligible uses. So I'll turn it over to her right now.
All right, thank you for that. So eligible uses are going to be somewhat repeated as well as ineligible uses when we get to specific uses. So we're going to start kind of broad sweeping strokes here in this conversation and then narrow the conversation down to more specificity. So eligible uses and costs include costs and uses that help the local government review, have the technical support they need for the certification of applications and CEQA documents. Also, local government or other professional preparation of environmental documents in compliance with CEQA for permits, licenses, or other authorizations to engage in commercial cannabis activities. So there's largely two buckets here. How the local government may use the monies to help facilitate a more streamlined permit processing system or expedite the permit processing system, but also some direct pass-through grant opportunities. So, for example, the third bullet point on eligible uses is probably largely a reference to direct grant opportunities. So anything that includes mitigation measures related to environmental compliance, especially and including water conservation and protection measures. Grant dollars may also be passed through directly to provisional licensees to assist licensees in meeting annual license requirements. And this includes, but is not limited to, uses such as hiring a consultant or consultants to assess environmental impacts. So maybe think of this as technical assistance for applicants for support with making it from, say, application to annual licensure, as well as meeting the CEQA requirements associated with Appendix G development. Other uses may be proposed as eligible uses and costs, so long as those other uses further the intent of the program as determined by the Department of Cannabis Control, or as identified on a case-by-case basis through review of the local jurisdiction's annual plan, including the application and the budget form. So this does have a pretty broad sweeping scope of eligible uses. And these are all from the grant guidelines document that the state has on the Department of Cannabis Control website. Ineligible uses would include costs or fees related to litigation. So neither the county nor an applicant can utilize the local jurisdiction assistant grant funding for costs or fees related to litigation, nor can the monies be used for the payment of fines or other penalties incurred for violations of environmental laws and regulations. So state and local commercial cannabis licenses or application fees, so those are not eligible, except for fees related specifically to CEQA compliance and review. So while the grant monies are not eligible, say, to cover the cost of a fee waiver for a permit application locally or a state license, they could be eligible for, say, Appendix G related fees. That would be a good example. The use of this grant money and costs associated with it may not supplant existing cannabis-related funding for the local jurisdiction. This also includes replacing existing cannabis-related funding, such as using grant funds to pay salaries of existing staff involved in the cannabis permitting process. And we'll talk a little bit more about salaries and the specific uses. There is a slide on that specifically. Grant funding cannot be used for costs incurred outside of the grant funding expenditure period, which is on the timeline slide, and we can always go back to it if there's questions about that. Grant monies cannot be used for the acquisitions where the purchase price is greater than the appraised value, and there's some more information in the specific uses on that item as well. And grant monies may not be used for enforcement costs related to measures to ensure compliance with local and state commercial cannabis laws or regulations. This does not, however, include regular inspection costs done as part of the local permitting process. So separating enforcement out from compliance inspection costs, essentially. Other prohibited uses may be determined by the Department of Cannabis Control. When looking at specific uses, which is where we can kind of get into a little more minutia rich or meatier conversation, the specific uses listed on the next few slides are prohibited unless the grant applicant can provide a detailed description that satisfies the department as to how the specific use will further the intended purpose of transitioning commercial cannabis licenses from a provisional license to an annual license. So throughout the course of the application and the language of the application, we're going to be held accountable to showing how the use we're proposing is intended to help in that transition from provisional to annual licensure. And then furthermore, we're going to have to show benchmarks showing success that folks are actually moving through the program towards annual licensure because of the assistance provided under this grant. Grant program funds cannot be used to replace local, state, or federal funds that have been already allocated or encumbered for the same purpose. So kind of similar to the ineligible uses that we just discussed and repeating that concept again. Grant program funding is intended to support local jurisdictions in aiding provisional licenses, right? So it's really about provisional license holders and helping them meet the requirements that are necessary to transition them into an annual license. So the funds are not available for annual license holders, nor would they be available for, say, applicants or parties that don't have a provisional license at the state level for any reason or other. So, and then again, just wrapping up the slide, for specific use or expenditure that may generate income or funding for the local jurisdiction beyond the grant funding expenditure period. So the termination of the grant agreement or past March 31st, 2025, which is when this grant funding period ends, okay? The grant applicant must provide detailed justification for how expenditures will primarily support, again, the transition of provisional license holders to annual license holders. So we've got a little handful of slides with specific uses. And then, so as we go through them, specific uses will all be labeled or listed on the left-hand part of the slide in bold, with prohibited uses in the middle and allowable uses to the right. So conferences are a prohibited use in general. So conferences are any meeting, retreat, seminar, symposium, workshop, or event whose primary purpose is the dissemination of technical information. However, when looking at the bottom of the slide, trainings are allowable uses. So they may be allowed when the training is necessary to meet the objectives of the project or program. So just something to consider there. And then printing and publication. So allowable use would be the cost of preparing informational leaflets, reports, manuals, and publications that further the intent of the grant program. However, the printing of hard copies is discouraged by the department, given the prevalence of electronic and virtual publication means. So we want you to potentially do the reports, but not spend a lot of money on printing, try to make those copies available electronically if possible. Contractual and consultant costs for professional services. It looks like both local jurisdiction and the direct grant opportunities for applicants or permit holders. Allowable uses for those funds do include contractual consultant costs and the expenses associated with purchasing goods and or procuring services performed by an individual or organization other than the applicant in the form of a procurement relationship. So this might be your technical, your consultant that's helping you with Appendix G, or your lake and street bed alteration agreement, or your water protection plan, or any kind of aspect of CEQA and or transitioning your provisional license into an annual. However, fines, penalties, damages, or other settlements are prohibited costs. So if over the course of setting up your cultivation site or your facility, you have costs resulting from violations of or alleged violations of or failure to comply with federal, state, tribal, local, or foreign laws and regulations, you would not be eligible for using grant monies to cover the costs resulting from said violations or alleged violations or lack of compliance. So definitely any sort of fine, penalty, or damage or settlement would be ineligible use of these funds. License fees, mentioned this a little bit earlier. So there's a prohibition of using the grant monies on state or local commercial cannabis licenses or application fees. However, there is an exception for allowable use of fees related to CEQA compliance and review. So in Mendocino, that might be for cultivators, the fee associated with the review of an Appendix G, perhaps. Specific uses, this is a little technical and probably maybe more relevant to the local jurisdiction, but also in some cases may be relevant to a direct grant applicant. So this is a little hard to tease out, but there are some state definitions about equipment. So equipment means tangible personal property, including information technology systems that have a useful life of more than 1 year and a per unit acquisition cost, which equals or exceeds $5,000. So more than $5,000 per unit is going to trigger equipment definition is what it looks like here. For the terms' sake of this conversation, acquisition cost means the cost of the asset, including the cost to ready the asset for its intended use. So if the equipment has an installation and a setup cost, that would all be part of the equipment cost is how we have interpreted this. Acquisition cost for equipment, for example, means the net invoice price of the equipment, including costs of any modifications, attachments, accessories, and ancillary apparatus necessary to make it usable for the purpose for which it is acquired. And then general purpose equipment means equipment that is not limited to technical activities. Examples might be office equipment and furnishings, modular offices, telephone networks, informational technology equipment and systems, air conditioning or refrigeration equipment, reproduction and printing equipment, and motor vehicles. However, some of these items are allowable uses depending on, again, their per unit acquisition cost. And if they exceed that per unit acquisition cost, they may be determined to be allowable for rental or costs of general purpose equipment. So, for example, vehicles may be leased under the grant, but not purchased. The lease or rental agreement term must terminate at the end of the grant period. So clearly prohibited uses would be acquisition costs of general purpose equipment or lease to own. right, sort of scenarios. For vehicles and equipment leases or rentals with an acquisition cost that equals or exceeds $5,000, rates should be in light of such factors as rental costs of comparable vehicles and equipment, if any, market conditions in the area, alternatives that may be available, and the type, life expectancy, condition, and value of the vehicle or equipment leased. So it might be hard to justify a tractor, right? Or purchasing a vehicle for the county, perhaps. I think that's largely what they're looking at here, are some of the larger per unit dollar amounts for items. Informational technology systems and computing devices. So computing devices are defined herein as machines used to acquire, store, analyze, process, and publish data and other information electronically. So again, this also includes the accessories for that computer, such as printing and transmitting and receiving data or storing electronic information. So these may be allowable, but there's also restrictions on them, which is kind of the point that the state is trying to get across with these tables that they put together. All requests and proposals for an information technology system so should include specific use. And that needs to be included in the application and the budget justification for the department to review, the department being the Department of Cannabis Control to review, and make a determination as to its allowable or prohibited use. In the grant application itself, it does, the language does suggest in the instructions that if the department would like more information about a proposed aspect of the grant application, they can request it, and amendments can be done throughout the course of the application process. And so, you know, they may, items may come forward in the proposal that the department might ask for clarity on, and or that the department may say no to. So that is possible as we move forward with the application and then submit it and then interact with the state in relationship to this process and this program. Definitely prohibited uses for information technology systems would include computing devices, ancillary equipment, software, firmware, and similar procedures, services, and related resources. Examples of prohibited information technology systems would include service contracts, operating systems, printers, and computers that have an acquisition cost of $5,000 or more. However, I think if you did a lease program, you could probably get away with some of those costs based on the previous slide when we looked at equipment. So there are some places where equipment and information technology systems seem to be overlapping from a review of the application. Additionally, prohibited would be information technology services such as networking, help desk or support desk services, because those are considered indirect costs. They don't want them in this bucket. So those costs would be known as indirect costs, and they would go under facilities and administrative costs. So I think some of this also is just trying to make sure that there's a simple way for the local jurisdiction to categorize expenses and programs without having to create an application that has a heck of a lot of minutia and detail in it. So we'll have to provide narrative description as well as budgetary information. Salaries and wages. So salaries and wages may be allowable as part of employee compensation for personnel services in proportion to the amount of time or effort an employee devotes to the grant-supported project or program itself during the period of performance under the award. So this might include salaries for specific persons on the staff that, say, review CEQA documents and or draft CEQA documents. It may also include salaries associated with overtime that might not be part of the budget for a local jurisdiction, but is going to be necessary so that they can make sure that they process applications and CEQA documentation in a timely fashion. And in order to utilize any of the salary offerings or opportunities, the local jurisdiction must keep adequate documentation that details how specific positions that are on the budget will be used in the local permitting process to further and meet the intent of the grant program. So this could include, but is not limited to, documentation on minimum qualifications and duty statements. And then also, I don't know if any of the public has seen the details that go into developing a fee, but that actually has a list of every person in the department who's going to touch a permit that fee is associated with and the amount of hours they're estimated to be putting into said permit. So they're looking for that sort of detailed reporting from the local jurisdictions in order for salaries and wages to be included. So prohibited uses of salary and wage allocations would be amounts charged to grant-supported projects or programs for personnel services that are not based on, say, an adequate payroll distribution system. So we'd have to really make sure that we can clearly show that the salary and the wage amount charged is in relationship to transitioning an applicant to a permit holder, the permit holder to an annual license holder. So let's see if we can go on to the next slide. So buildings and land construction. So building means any permanent structure that is designed or intended to support, enclose, shelter, or protect a person, animals, or property, and having a permanent roof that is supported by columns or walls. Uses related to building and land construction must be subject to Labor Code Section 1782. And so prohibited uses would be the acquisition of buildings, facilities, or land, including lease to own agreements or rent to own agreements. And so this is not only would not only be the case, say, for the local jurisdiction, but also for anyone who would like to apply for a direct grant opportunity. So that's what we have.
Right.
Yes, go ahead, Supervisor Haschak.
Okay, so those were kind of the what we can do, what we can't do with this money. I think that what I would like to come away with is, what is the big picture? What's the overview of how do we get, our 1,100 or however many are in that provisional licensure with the state? How do we get them to the annuals? And, I think staffing is going to be a huge thing, and people might have other ideas. There's also been ideas about, doing an EIR for the county. So there's lots of big picture ideas out there. So what I'd like this conversation to be is, hey, what are the big picture ideas that we can do to have a strategic plan for getting people from where we are to where we need to be? And, if there's specific things that you have within that, go for it. So let's see, how might the local, the grant provide additional support to eligible equity applicants? Should direct grant applicants be required to provide matching funds to be eligible for the funding? Should an application timeline be established? Should there be priority criteria set? I'm also hearing, let's see, looking at the questions. Okay, so let's start it off with some of the questions, but we don't want to get bogged down on just going from one question to another, we want to be having a discussion about what the big picture is. So let's see. The first question I have is Julia's. Has the cannabis program requested monies for this grant already? If so, what exactly did they request? We haven't requested any money, right? Because that's what we're working on right now.
Correct. The grant application process itself doesn't open until tomorrow. And then we'll close on November 15th. And then the grants won't be awarded until December, which means monies likely won't be available to local jurisdictions until early in 2022.
Okay, Ron's question is the program MCP suggestion list available? So,
no, we have not made that available. It is in a hodgepodge list form that was really notes at this point.
Okay, so we don't have that available. So we're looking at the, I guess one question I have is if we're looking at the big picture, there's certainly been a lot of frustration out there about staffing. And I think, Kristen, you said the other day that you thought you'd have sufficient staffing, but I think people want to know, do we need to have outside consultants or, do we need to hire foresters, biologists to make this really happen quickly? Because, the experience has been, it's been a very slow process for a lot of people and the staffing hasn't been adequate. So how do we get that appropriate staffing? Is that part of the request?
Yeah, we'll be putting some staffing components in there. We are hoping to have some additional meetings tomorrow just to kind of see what's available from outside groups. But we also want to be mindful to not do staffing up based on grant monies that are a one-time grant money proposal, right? Because then we'd have to hire temporary staff, which is probably not going to give us the skilled staff that we need to actually administer these programs in a meaningful way. So we'll be putting some staffing funds into and some consulting allocations for the program into what the county is looking to spend from the grant itself. And then we'll also are looking forward to hopefully providing direct grants to applicants, provisional license holders, so that they can hire consultants, biologists, and the folks that they need to conduct the CEQA mitigation evaluation on their properties.
So would a programmatic EIR be available?
I don't know how that would fit into this. So we already have for Chapter 10A17 and are operating under an approved mitigated negative declaration whose performance standards are folded into the ordinance itself. Programmatic environmental impact reports would be developed for individual applicants, say if we were in a discretionary permit. Environmental impact reports may be developed for individual applicants if we were in a discretionary permitting program, but we don't have that. And the county, I don't think there's any way, usually if an ordinance is standing and you conduct a programmatic environmental impact report on that ordinance, you have to rescind the ordinance so that there's an opportunity to fold the performance standards in. So I don't think there's actually a need for a programmatic environmental impact report for the program that we currently have. And it's not applicable to our applicants in the cultivation realm. However, if grant monies are made available to other types of activities throughout the county, the grant funding could be available for applicants going through discretionary permitting programs and or for the county if they are developing an environmental impact report or a negative declaration or a mitigated negative declaration for that discretionary permit that might be associated with, say, manufacturing or distribution or retail center. So is possible, but probably won't be the bulk of where monies or the type of CEQA documents that need to be prepared to help folks get from provisional to annual licenses.
Okay. Can funds be utilized for folks who have applied for but not received the provisional?
I think they will have to have the provisional license for the fund for them to be eligible for the funds. Yes. So I don't think an applicant would be eligible. I think they would have to have already achieved the provisional license.
Okay. Does the county have a grant proposal available for review?
No, we do not. We're hoping to prepare the grant proposal over a much longer, robust timeline. And it was assigned Tuesday and is due 7 days later. So we do not have a draft yet.
Okay. So Marnie says, Ted wants taxes paid with this money. Where are taxes on these uses? I'm not exactly sure what the question is. I mean, I see the question there and I heard the question. I don't have any tax numbers in front of me to really be able to report back on how much tax revenue might be generated. I really don't know how to ask that question. But if the attendee would like to elaborate, perhaps we could come back to it. Okay, will this PowerPoint be available after the meeting?
I don't see why not. It could be posted on the Mendocino County Cannabis page. But the entire presentation should be available on the YouTube channel. So folks will be able to look back on it. It will include the audio and the presentation on the YouTube channel.
Okay, and Kathy writes, is this grant program available for people who did not have a license yet and are waiting for phase 3? It sounds like the answer is no.
I would say the answer is no, unless you can somehow apply under phase 3 and achieve a provisional license while the grant is open, then yes, absolutely. The grant should have funds available through 2025. So it's not absolutely no way could that happen, but it has a lot to do with the timing of phase 3 applications coming online and the elevated CEQA requirements that kind of phase out the ability for folks to renew their provisional licenses down the road.
Okay, what amount of additional staffing will be needed for reviewing applications and Appendix Gs to get our current cohort to annuals?
Well, we are looking at adding some senior planning positions to the program, which will be incredibly helpful. So we are getting ready to recruit for a chief planner. A chief planner in the cannabis program, again, would give us an elevated amount of CEQA knowledge internally, which would be hugely helpful. We also are getting ready to hire as many as 6 additional planners and or planner techs. So all of those pieces are hugely important. And again, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, we are looking at where we can plug some temporary heavy workloads, so to speak, with consultants. So we'll be kind of folding all of those pieces together so that hopefully we can have a robust team of knowledgeable persons to help process applications.
So just a clarification on that last question is that the planners that we're hiring, would they be eligible for the grant, or would that be county general fund?
Well, fiscal does not love the idea at all of putting a bunch of new higher salaries into the grant unless we can show that we will be able to support those salaries down the road with revenue generation as the grant fades out. So we will see a combination of some cost recovery for salaries, but we aren't doing 100% of anyone's salary. There will not be 100% coverage of anyone's salary with this grant.
Okay. So Ari says refund forms for CEQA consultants.
No, because we can't reimburse. So we can't reimburse ourselves either. So in the timeline, if we were to go back to the timeline slide, which might be helpful. So sorry for scrolling through the slides here really quick. But I think this is kind of important to, oh, goodness. It's not cooperating with me. Sorry, everyone. I apologize. Okay, so we cannot reimburse funds or provide funds for any expenditure that occurred before the Board of Supervisors approves the grant proposal itself, the grant application. And I'm unclear, and we have a list of questions that we're putting together. So maybe Caitlin, this should go in our hit list of questions. We have a list of questions that we're putting together to submit to the state. So we have until 11:59 p.m. tomorrow to submit questions about the grant to the state, and even interested parties, not just local jurisdictions, can submit questions to the state using the grants@cannabis.ca.gov email address on the screen. But they will not respond to questions until they post the questions and their answers on October 15th. So that might be a nebulous one to respond to before we actually post the grant itself. But definitely probably doesn't need to be figured out for the sake of applying for the grant. So that's a good news there.
So Ari also says, hire enough staff to process applications quickly.
I certainly hope so. We are working on that. And again, looking at options for hiring, and
help farms succeed by hiring application advocates to them fix small application.
So I do think that there can be direct grant funds made available for technical support for applicants, even in relationship to completing your application so that you qualify for a permit, because the steps to getting to an annual license of the state is moving beyond the operating applicant, right, the embossed receipt holder, into an annual permit so that you qualify to submit an Appendix G. So I do think some technical assistance could be made available to applicants still working on completing their application. So if during a review, they need another round of mapping because they need to show their waterways perhaps and the setbacks from those waterways, I imagine that those types of consulting services would be eligible for grant funds.
Okay, Julia writes a big picture. Oop, I lost it.
Do you want me to read it?
No, big picture is the biggest hole in the Mendocino County program is CEQA. Therefore, most of the funds might want to be directed that way. Okay. And Laurence, what is the county's plans, suggestions at this point?
Well, we have a kind of a hit list of minutia, but looking at the application, I don't think we need the amount of specificity that we have on our running internal document. So I think we want to draft the application in such a way that it is broad and allows for a diversity of opportunity for applicants and the county to ensure that we can help in a timely fashion with the transition from provisional to annual licensure. So I would encourage folks to not be discouraged when you look at the application over the next couple of weeks, and we don't have this itemized hit list of every single little detail that might be covered under the grant. The state definitely does not want the application to appear that way based on how the application and the directions are structured.
Okay. Mo says, I'd like to hear if any of the items brought forward in CCAG's memo from Tuesday could be used. I have that memo right here. It says there's a list of 9 items. Allow applicants to use grant funding to receive a fee waiver of DCC cannabis application licensing fees. Is that possible?
No.
Okay, fee waivers for the state water board tier 1 and 2 fees.
I believe that that's probably possible because if we can justify that any Department of Fish and Wildlife notification fee project, right, and technical assistance, as well as State Water Resource Control Board fee, right, program or technical assistant is tied directly into your CEQA evaluation for your site, then yes, I think we could possibly justify those fees because of their environmental components and their relationship to CEQA.
Okay, fee waivers for CDFW LSAA application fees.
I believe so. Again, that all falls into, those are critical components of the overall CEQA analysis for these sites.
Okay, grant funding for the LSA projects. Mm-hmm. Sounds like a yes.
Mitigations, yep. I think
grant funding for building ponds and water storage, such as rainwater catchment systems or water storage tanks.
Yep, because water conservation is a defined area of eligible uses. So I think anything that we can justify under water conservation could fit into this grant for direct funds.
Grant funding for CAL FIRE and local fire department cannabis building fees.
That is maybe a little bit harder. However, I do think if CAL FIRE comes out and tells you that you have to meet mitigations for your road to be fire safe, that you might be able to get away with doing those mitigations under grant funding. Traditional like building permit clearance fees are not included as far as we can tell, because there's this prohibition in the Budget Act that prohibits the use of the funds for state and local commercial cannabis license or application fees. So I think we can always ask, but definitely not for like a bureau fee, or a Department of Cannabis Control fee or a permit fee. So it's a little unclear.
Okay, and then I appreciate this one. Grant funding to be set aside to create a best management practices program for Mendocino County to incentivize best growing practices in regenerative farming.
I don't see anything in here that suggests that the funds would be appropriately spent developing said program, because participating in the program isn't necessarily, and at least I haven't been able to put it together in my mind, so maybe someone will help when we go to callers, but I don't understand how that's going to help someone transition from a provisional to an annual. It's not something that can get filled in on the Appendix G. So possibly I just haven't been able to connect it into, and there's nothing clearly in here suggesting that that would be an eligible use.
And fee waivers for enrolling in the OCAL certification program. That's the same
kind of the same, yeah.
And creating an appellation.
I don't think that would qualify either, although it would be great. I just don't think it fits into the transitioning a provisional to an annual component, which is the, really foundation of this grant program.
Okay, so I kind of think that we can see, does it have a direct, is it creating a pathway to that annual license?
Correct. That's really the key piece here.
Can we use the funds to construct an F1 occupancy building with ADA compliance?
I think probably not. Part of what comes up around that is not just the language here around building and land construction, but if we're looking at CEQA in of itself, adding any sort of impermeable structure to a piece of property increases the impacts. So what we're looking at with funds is mitigation and reducing impacts so that there's a less than significant impact, qualifying or creating the ability to certify the Appendix G and then move to an annual license. So I don't think commercial structures are eligible under this grant. Perhaps there is an opportunity to look at the Title 24 improvements that were just passed by the state of California for enclosed horticulture. Title 24 amendments for enclosed horticulture are designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So it's possible, I think, that there could be some direct grants available to subsidize facilities that want to do those upgrades so they're more efficient and in compliance with the newly passed Title 24 standards. But I think that's a question that we're looking to ask the state as well.
Okay, so this is from Laura and Marty. Kristen, what do you see as the best uses of this grant money, both pots? Best uses for the county and best uses for the applicants. It kind of goes into Ron's question further on. What is the split going to be? And how do we come up with that split? That's kind of the big picture question that I'd like to deal with too.
Well, I think the split has to do with, as we look at what kind of cost the county might accrue based on administering the grant program, staffing up, hiring consultants, looking at any sort of technology features that might be helpful, right? As we look at all of those costs, what would be really nice would be to see as much as we can, if not all of what's left over, go into a direct grant opportunity program. And those grant funds just would need to be spent down over the course of the next 4 years by the applicants who receive the grants. And I think probably what's going to be incredibly valuable to the community and our applicants is the ability to have some of these larger projects supported through direct grant funds. So, lake and streamlet alteration agreements are not only expensive in the notification process, but the notification process in that permit doesn't cover any of the work orders associated with that LSAA. And furthermore, Mendocino County has a significant number of aging op law letters, which people will have to notify DFW as those are coming to an end. So they'll be paying for notifications to re-notify on that op law and then potentially have projects. So I think there's probably several years of DFW expenses, probably water board expenses. I'd like to see water meters and the installation of those water meters included, and adequate water storage so that we can make sure that we're not impacting groundwater and our natural resources. But I think, really, how do we cover those really big ticket items that are about environmental compliance for our applicants? Those are expensive items, and I think the direct grant funds really should focus on covering those expenses to the best of its ability.
Okay. A question I have is, who's going to administer this program?
Well, we are staffing up and we plan on hiring, and staff internally will administer the program. So the county will be administering this program.
Okay, it seems like a lot to take on with trying to get everyone to their annuals and administering this program on top of that. So if the county used some of the money for the county to write the Appendix G for applicants, how does that impact those that already hired consultants and can't get refunds now for what they paid them?
I think if the county is going to put a fee forward, which we've been playing with and talked a little bit about publicly, we would allow for both pathways, right? So we would allow for folks who are already in the process of drafting or writing their own Appendix G materials to complete that process and then opt to submit that Appendix G, that completed Appendix G, to the county for review. I think if we're looking forward to phase 3, there's a lot of challenges with how Appendix G is currently implemented. So we would want to put a fee in place so that the county can draft those Appendix Gs. If we bring that fee forward in December, I would encourage the board to consider making it available for phase 1 and phase 2 farmers if they choose to use that pathway. So I guess that's about the most information I have on that.
Okay, and Mo says that the money should be available for applicants that need to do remediation measures to meet SSHR requirements.
Agreed. Right? You get an SSHR response back that you need a biological survey. I think it qualifies for technical assistance. You could apply for a grant to do that biological survey. If you needed to, based on your SSHR, move outside of a streamside management area, I think that would also be an applicable use of direct grant funds, for example, or road work, perhaps. Yeah.
So would grant money be available to reimburse payments already made and where you can't reimburse? Right?
Again, yeah, that is correct, Supervisor. We cannot reimburse.
Okay. And please define provisional license holder. Is that an applicant with a county permit or an embossed receipt and a state provisional license? Or does that include also people who are so far only in the county's permitting system and do not have a state provisional license? Also, will this grant money be available to people who have not yet applied to cultivate cannabis?
So provisional license holder means that the individual applying for the grant or in order to be eligible for a direct grant has a state issued provisional license. So they would have to have a county embossed receipt or a county permit and it's an issued state provisional license.
Okay, and just to clarify that, so if people aren't provisional at some point, then they're not eligible.
Correct.
And do you know what that point would be?
At any point, really. So if you don't have a provisional license at the state, you can't apply for grant funds that would help you transition your provisional license to an annual license, right? So these funds are specifically for provisional license holders and local jurisdictions working together to transition those provisional license holders into annual licenses. So you would not be eligible if you do not have a provisional license.
Yeah, and Tony asked, have you considered a partnership with the existing business development centers, such as West Center, to provide technical support?
I am not familiar with West Center specifically, but we are looking at whether or not we can set funds aside for consulting services to help the county expedite the processing of permits and potentially Appendix Gs down the road. So that is a consideration.
So this money, can it be used for, just like the equity grant, for technical assistance, for helping people do their taxes and?
No.
No, just for, but it could be used for helping people fill out applications or whatever forms they need to do.
Yep.
With the Appendix G and everything else.
Correct.
Okay, are we still looking at 80 to 90% of farms not passing CEQA and why? What can we do as farmers to change this outcome with this grant? Great question.
That is a great question. So I think some of the high numbers that were really concerning to the county and probably applicants in general was that the Appendix G pathway had not necessarily been codified, right? It was an agreement between CDFA and the county of Mendocino. So as of the summer during the governor's budget trailer bill, we saw the Appendix G pathway be codified in statute and now is a recognized pathway for showing your project-specific CEQA analysis so you can qualify for an annual license. That has been codified in also the emergency regulations that just went into effect, I want to say, on the 27th or 29th-ish of October. So I think because we have this legally recognized pathway that's agreed upon, it takes some of the tenuousness of Appendix G out of the picture. However, This is still a pass-fail system, right? So an Appendix G is literally a CEQA document that says, we've done an analysis of this issued permit, and the analysis shows less than significant impact. So if the farmer can meet the requirements of 10A17 when it's fully implemented and the MND, and then create the CEQA document showing that their compliance with the ordinance and the mitigated negative declaration ensures that they'll have less than significant impacts, they will qualify for an annual license. Part of what's going to be tricky about the numbers, 80 to 90%, less, whatever that means, really is dependent on, I think, the activities that have occurred on each project site. So tree clearing is going to be hard to overcome because of how it is written into the ordinance and its consideration in the MND. Relocating away from a stream side management area, easier to deal with. So I don't have numbers currently, but yeah, we'll have to see how it goes with folks. I think if they're eligible for a license or a permit going forward with, sensitive species habitat review implemented and the AQMD implemented, and they haven't conducted tree clearing that has gone unnoticed, I think they have a pretty good shot here. So.
All right. Mo says it would be great to see the funds also used to create new types of water storage, such as water storage tanks or ponds, rainwater catchment systems. So
I agree. All important components of water conservation.
Okay, Michael has thoughts on the EIR question. So can we let Michael in to verbalize that?
Yes, hello. Thank you so much. Thank you, Supervisor Haschak and Kristen and Caitlin. This is an incredible conversation. I'm so grateful to be having it. This actually relates to what we were just discussing as far as the discretionary component of that we don't have. And so, we're psyched that there are what changes have been made do make it more likely for folks to get through. As far as the discretionary component that doesn't exist in 2218 anymore, the last suggestion that we put on the MCA memo in our bullet pointed list was to use some of these funds to ensure that we can do the work needed on 10A17 to incorporate the discretionary components. So there will be an environmental review, long-term required to add that to the ordinance. So understanding that what Kristen said before is, it sounded like we could potentially do the EIR if it's related to a discretionary component ordinance, but we can also, as we know, potentially just revise 10A17. And so since either way, creating this discretionary component is essential, we can, to get folks through to their annuals, the folks who will not be able to make it through the Appendix G, that's something that I think would be really important to look at on a big picture structural level as well.
All right, thank you, Michael. Did that make sense, Kristen?
It does make sense. I think there's some real timing challenges for that to be impactful. In order for 10A17, and this is based on conversations with County Council, because we've had some conversations about this, in order for 10A17 to have a discretionary permitting opportunity, it would require a change to the zoning table in 20.242. Any changes to 20.242 requires the ordinance not just being heard and directed forward by the Board of Supervisors, but also it would have to go to the Planning Commission, be scheduled in the Planning Commission before it comes back to the board. That's roughly a 12-month process. So the concern is that we would be into like 2023 almost as we're looking at discretionary permits coming on board at the earliest. And I don't know how we would possibly process discretionary permits with new applications potentially in 2023 by the June 30th date in 2023, where we would have to actually have written the initial studies, the staff reports, and the CEQA documentation for that permit, and publicly noticed it so that folks are eligible to continue renewals. I don't know how we would possibly meet those timelines.
Sure. Well, that one, what we had suggested initially was, have an urgency ordinance, which is CEQA exempt, to kind of create that method in the interim while we're working on the longer term solution that we know will take longer. So that would kind of create this bridge, because we're going to get to it. It just takes more time, and it would still serve the same purpose.
Yeah, except for it doesn't seem as feasible based on what County Council has relayed back to us. So I don't know if an urgency ordinance is the proper vehicle or even an eligible vehicle for this type of approach.
Well, I totally hear that. And I know, we've heard that before on the urgency ordinance side. So I guess we just have to look into it, because ultimately, what we don't want to come to, and if we have the ability to stop it, is folks coming to the end of their licensure and then being removed statutorily from the program because there's no existing discretionary component.
Okay, so Tony writes, is the MCP working with any external support to build the comprehensive grand proposal? Are you doing it alone, or are you doing it alone?
Well, thank goodness the MCP is not doing it alone. We have other departments who are pitching in to assist us. So it is a county team effort at this point.
Okay, but there's not external support like West Company was mentioned earlier.
No, we have not hired or engaged a consultant to write the grant proposal, which was basically the direction was provided 2 days ago. And it's due on Tuesday. So short notice on something like that.
Earl writes, I have a medical license for the last 6 years. Can I apply?
Not until phase 3 opens. So if you're looking to cultivate, there's no applications available unless, of course, you are on an industrially zoned property, and then you may apply for enclosed mixed light or indoor cultivation through our phase 2 application process. But other than that, there are no cultivation applications available in the unincorporated area.
Okay, Mo writes, if people get through to an annual with Appendix G, but want to build new things later after approval, such as an F1 occupancy structure, setting aside funds to pay for addendums to the original Appendix G would be great.
I think that all is possible, especially if you can achieve your Appendix G completion in your annual license. And then make the amendments that you might want before March of 2025. Because we have to spend the funds down by the end of the program date.
Okay, Julia writes, LSAs and CEQA are the biggest stumbling blocks, including expansion of gardens beyond 200 feet. Okay. Any comment to that? Or
I think that they are expensive components for sure. And so, again, we're hoping to make direct funds available, direct grant opportunities available to help cover the costs of those projects.
Okay. Could the money be used to pay for building permits for infrastructure on a site?
I think that's going to be hard because, again, if you're looking to expand your footprint, you're likely increasing your potential for CEQA impacts. So I don't think that that's the intention of the program, is to allow for additional or provide monies for additional development unless it's a mitigation measure, so to speak.
Okay, and Mo, I think writing for a lot of people, we need more planners to review applications.
Hear, hear.
Okay, Sherry, who will write up the grant application? Who will create the budget for the grant? Who will decide how funds are ultimately used? Can funds be used for law enforcement to target illegal grows?
Funds cannot be used for law enforcement to target illegal grows. They can be used to assist in inspections for compliance of applicants and permitted parties in the program, but not for law enforcement efforts. Our team within the MCP will be writing the grant application. We will be creating the budget and reviewing the budget and the application with various other departments internally, such as the auditor's office, fiscal and finance, the CEO's office. We have some questions out for HR. So there's a lot of county departments working together to make sure that we have a drafted grant proposal and budget.
Okay, and then who's going to oversee it?
Again, the MCP will oversee the grant with the MCP staff.
Okay. And Laurent says, when will the county's proposed application be complete? And will there be a method for the public to view and comment before it is submitted?
We will be working diligently on the application all weekend. We have to submit it to the other departments on Tuesday and no later than Tuesday. And then it should be published sometime late next week so that it can be heard on consent at the October 26th Board of Supervisors meeting. So there will be a public comment period available for that item on the October 26th Supervisors meeting. Because it's slated to come forward as a consent item, you will want to prepare your public comment if you have any for items, I believe, not on the agenda. Is that correct, Supervisor Haschak?
No, they could have it polled. They could request to have it polled.
Okay.
And discuss it because it is on the agenda. It's just it would be on the consent calendar.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess the basic question is it possible for people to see it before the Thursday before that Tuesday board meeting on the 26th?
It's not going to be possible for people to see it until it's publicly published. As soon as it's publicly published, everyone can see it. But we can't, shuffle it around in draft form to some parties and not others. So when it's publicly noticed, everyone will have access to it.
Okay, this is from Lynn. Can MCP use the bulk of the funds to contract with CEQA professionals to facilitate moving provisional license holder to annual licenses? That's the great question. This would eliminate over 1,000 application submissions, review of those applications, and oversight.
Potentially. So part of what is a significant challenge with consultants is we have to manage conflicts with our consultants that we look at hiring. So if we're to hire consultants to conduct complete reviews and potentially review and or develop CEQA documents, we have to make sure that those consulting firms have not also taken on clients who are individual applicants, because we can't have them writing the applications and reviewing them, so to speak, right? So we are looking at ways to mitigate that by having consultants do segments that aren't necessarily as associated with reviews so that we have a broader pool of consultants to choose from. The county did issue an RFP for support with CEQA and permitting. So we do have a number of consultants that have submitted information and we're going through those materials now. But the list is, while the list is a pretty excellent list of consultants, many of them have since the RFP, as I mentioned, taken on the drafting of applications and Appendix G materials. So we would not be able to utilize those consultants for full review purposes.
Okay, is there still a low income requirement, or does only holding a provisional make you eligible?
There is not currently an income requirement attached to this local jurisdiction assistance grant program that we're talking about today. And as of Tuesday, a little echo. And as of Tuesday, we also, the Board of Supervisors directed staff to remove the income threshold associated with the equity program. So these programs are different grant pools. And so I don't anticipate putting an income requirement or income threshold onto this grant program that we're talking about, the Local Jurisdiction Assistance Grant Program.
Okay, Julia writes, what about the portal review staff shortage and continued incompletes for items non-cannabis or items state-oriented? Will people be disqualified if there is an incomplete determined after the close of portal?
That is the plan, yes. So the portal was about and is about receiving complete applications. So if folks do not get their applications in early enough to achieve a complete application, applications will be denied for incomplete submissions through the portal.
And that might be taken up by the board to provide some guidance. Kevin writes, could the grant cover solar installation?
I think the grant can cover anything that's in your Appendix G CEQA document. So if you are, say, on primary power source of a combustion engine, a generator, one of the goals of both the ordinance, the MND, and state goals for CEQA and environmental compliance would be to transition from that combustion engine to a renewable resource. So yeah, I think solar installation would absolutely fit into the scope of what the state has proposed here for direct grants.
Okay, Drew, oops. What happened to Drew's? It got skipped. Well, anyway, and the development of a pond certainly sounds like it would be.
It was the same question about solar.
Okay.
So they were answered at the same time.
Okay, and development of a pond is certainly
water conservation, perhaps.
Water, yeah. Okay. Staff and members of the Board of Supervisors have said repeatedly that as many as 90% or more of current applicants under 10A17, which is ministerial, will fail to obtain a state annual license. Has this changed? If not, without a discretionary land use permit ordinance, many current applicants will have no option once they fail in 10A17. With that in mind, do you still believe the county should not request funding for an EIR for a discretionary land use permit ordinance?
So just to unpack that a little bit, let's take it in sections, right? So I don't think we're going to hit the 90% or more that can't qualify for annual licenses. I think, again, a lot of the frustration and hesitation and perceived challenge with the ministerial program was that until this summer, there was no solid law or CEQA guideline that acknowledged Appendix Gs as an appropriate project-specific CEQA analysis pathway. So that has since been changed by the legislature during the governor's trailer bill, which passed in June of this year or early July. And the Appendix G pathway is now part of statute and recognized by regulations as a viable CEQA pathway for achieving an annual license. I don't think that there is enough time for the county to develop a discretionary land use ordinance and conduct a programmatic environmental impact report for those types of funds or expenses to be used by this grant. This grant is really focused on the transition of provisional license holders to annual licenses. And that transition and the CEQA documentation required for annual licensing needs to be largely prepared and either submitted to the county or drafted and publicly circulated by the county by no later than June 30th of 2023 in order for an applicant to qualify for renewal of a provisional license. So I just don't see how we would possibly by June 30th of 2023 transition to discretionary permits, process those discretionary permits, and have conducted a programmatic environmental impact report. I just don't think the timing works for what we have in front of us.
Okay, by when does someone need to have been given a provisional to apply? Is there a cutoff date?
There is not a cutoff date. So I think, once we have direct grants available, which is going to take a little bit, to be honest with you. We have to apply for the grant. Grant awards would be announced in December of this year. Funds may not be issued until early in 2022. So I think you have to have a provisional license by the time you apply for a direct grant in order to be eligible. So you have a little time.
What is a medicine license or script considered?
Personal use. So a recommendation from your doctor to cultivate for yourself or as a patient caregiver, perhaps, is a personal use and not a commercial cannabis permit with the county or a provisional license at the state.
Can one still get a provisional license?
One can get a provisional license if they have local authorization. So they hold an embossed receipt because they applied under phase 1 or phase 2, or they have a permit for a different type of cannabis activity that's issued by the county, or a permit for cultivation in the county.
Okay, and this is a 10% failure, or, well, asking if a land use process, and we've gone over that question a few times. Okay. We have submitted over 10 drafts of our Appendix G after having conducted our own M&D. After every submission, the planner has made new edits, notes, and requirements. With every draft submitted, we are permitted at the county level and have a provisional from DCC as well. This is our only hang-up keeping us from transitioning to an annual. When will the goalpost stop moving?
I don't think the goalpost is still moving. I think that has stopped. We're focused on implementation of the ordinance and implementation of the Appendix G pathway. I think the Appendix G can be a challenge to draft because it really has to specifically describe for every category in that Appendix G how the permit is compliant with the ordinance and the MND and will result in less than significant impacts. And CEQA is a very complex regulatory framework in the state of California. So sometimes changing a section of your Appendix G, that new language brings up additional questions about what that project is, aspects, what that project's environmental impacts might be. So definitely a lot of challenges with the way we have implemented the Appendix G with the applicant or their preparer writing the document and then turning it into us. Hindsight always gives us valuable information that you just don't have when you start a project. So.
Okay, with the recent referendum action, are there limitations to what actions the county can take to utilize these funds or overall amendments to the existing ordinance?
I don't know that the referendum necessarily impacts or limits how the county can utilize these funds. And then I think it's a separate question about amendments to the existing ordinance. I don't think the funds necessarily dictate or have anything to do with what amendments might be allowed for the existing ordinance. So maybe I'm not quite understanding the question, but I don't think the referendum impacts the funding.
Okay, and here's Michael with the big picture. It definitely seems that we should apply in the broadest way possible, but work to continue to identify the key areas for funding both on the county side and the applicant side and the methodology for grant distribution. So once the application is in, there will be more to discuss and solidify.
Correct. And I think one of the questions that we're putting in front of the state for the formal questions, right, that they'll post on the 15th is, do the local jurisdictions have the ability to amend these applications, right? We're trying today to write an application with a 5-year, 4-year lifespan and account for what we think might happen in the future and what the needs might be and where the monies might be best spent to be the most poignant and meaningful for the community and the county. And of course, we aren't going to think of everything, and some things probably that we think are going to be really meaningful are going to be kind of like, meh, okay, didn't do so much, perhaps, right? So one of the big questions Caitlin and I have set aside to send tomorrow is, what sort of flexibility or malleability does the county have with the funds once we've applied for and been awarded the grant? Can we make amendments? Can we fine tune it? And what are the kind of borders or boundaries on doing that?
Okay, and Ron, can we get Ron in? You can ask your question now about procedure. Is Ron available?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
I'm concerned about the procedure on this, particularly if, the grant allocations can't be changed. And I really don't want the cultivators to end up like Redwood Valley, to where, the cultivators get a small percent and a large amount goes to the county. And especially since the board has said, and Kristen repeated it, that you don't want short-term staff. So if we're bringing on staff to get through these applications, are we going to be using this grant funding to keep those people on staff? Or how can we adjust this so that once we get administrative needs done, that we can really put this to the cultivators? Because I think with some of these Appendix G issues, and I think it would be good to figure out how many actual applicants we have and maybe put out a proposal of saying, hey, are you willing to take on this many Appendix Gs for X amount of dollars? I mean, it's really difficult in doing this process without data. And it would have been easier if we had done some workshops and we said at the top line, we've got 18 million. We want to put X number of dollars to county, and that leaves this much left over for cultivators. Then we could know how to prioritize those items. And so when this comes to the board on the 26th, if it's pulled for consent, will the board be able to say, no, we don't want to do that, or we just want to go with what MCP recommends? What is a procedural question? That's a lot, but it was a detailed question I had. Thank you.
Well, if the board pulls it on consent, and then it's up for discussion, and anything can happen. Changes can be made at that point.
And then the public would have no ability to do it, to get it back in time. So whatever happens at that point would be final.
That's not necessarily the case. There is a board meeting on November 9th. So it is possible that the board could provide direction and have a second copy brought back on November 9th. But there are no opportunities past November 9th for the board to review the application because it is needing to be submitted by 11:59 p.m. on November 15th.
Thank you.
Sure, Ron. And just a reminder to everyone, the portal's open until the end of the month, and you have to get your submission in. If you're one of those who needs to submit through the portal, it's very important to do that, because if you're not in that, if you don't submit, then it's going to be very easy for the board to say, you didn't submit, so you're out. So please submit if you haven't. What happens to existing licensees while they are waiting on this grant money to fix compliance issues? Will you be revoking permits during this time?
Well, we will be revoking permits during that time, but I don't know for sure that we would be revoking permits because of compliance issues that could be mitigated with grant funds. So, if you don't have a lake and streambed alteration agreement and you haven't applied for a lake and streambed alteration agreement, we can't move you forward in the review process. You're probably in the portal, and if you don't have at least a valid notification, right, that you can show us through the portal, you would be subject to denial. So I hope that helps to clarify. There's so many different scenarios that might fit into this question, but I think that example might be kind of closer to the reality of what folks are dealing with as applicants currently.
Okay, and for all things that Kristen's talked about we can do with this money, will you be including them in the proposal?
Probably not in such minutia, right? So the proposal is limited on words. So our running list of things that the planners have thought about, that I've thought about, that Caitlin has thought about, that we've heard during the board meeting, that has turned up in memos, right, and other conversations, that running list is almost 5,000 words right now. And we're limited in words, so we're not going to be able to put the level of minutia that we've discussed into the application itself. So we're going to have to paint at a 30,000 level view and then allow staff to work with the applicants to fine-tune their grants to make sure that the mitigations fit into water conservation and or other aspects of CEQA.
Okay. Matt says, can the grant funds be used for renewable energy systems to meet the state's 50% renewable energy guidelines?
I would say yes.
And that would be a yes. Okay, Michael says, regarding conflicts for consultants, as long as they are not overseeing applications for their own clients, we could hopefully make that work. We have to get creative.
I think we do have to get creative, but it's also if you have a consulting firm that has, 10 or 20 applicants, I mean, they want those applicants to come through. They could recuse themselves from reviewing those applications, but it is tricky to have someone who's writing applications and Appendix Gs also be the reviewer certifier of said applications or Appendix Gs. So again, we're really looking at consultants to bolster aspects of the program and not take on the full review process, so to speak.
Okay, so does that mean you're looking at people with specific skills, such as a biologist or
No, not necessarily, because the county's not going to, I don't think we're in a position to hire, even temporarily, a biologist that can go out and do biological surveys, say for sensitive species habitat review. And that might potentially also be a conflict to not have that be a third-party biologist conducting those reviews. But we are specifically, a good example of what we're looking at is the portal has created a lot of administrative and planner tech type work that needs to be conducted, even planner one type work that needs to be conducted in organizing the materials that have come into the portal, getting them into Trackit, getting the Trackit categories updated so that that material is clean, so to speak, in Trackit with the current application and most recent application materials so that a more senior planner can conduct the review. So can we staff up, say, through consultants to take on that project component of doing the transition from portal into Trackit? That would hugely speed up application reviews if our planners aren't also, say, doing the administrative work of transferring that data. Okay.
We should apply a portion of these funds specifically to equity awardees.
That is a possibility. So we could look at whether or not there is a priority or say maybe a criteria difference between eligible equity applicants and say the rest of our application pool. So it's possible to consider things like if you're an equity applicant, you might not have to put up matching funds, whereas maybe someone else who's not in the been deemed eligible for equity might have to put up a percentage of matching funds. I mean, I think there's a bunch of different ways we could create some additional benefits for equity applicants via this program.
And that would be something that the county would do. It's not part of the grant itself.
Not that I see. So we have to provide a brief narrative in the application about how the funds would assist eligible equity applicants. But I don't know that we have to get into minutia-rich detail. We could say that we're looking at various ways to prioritize and or streamline the ability of equity applicants to be eligible for direct grants through this program. I don't think we have to know exactly what those mechanisms are to apply.
Okay, so can I use it to put in holding tanks? Sounds like.
I think if that's for water storage for irrigation purposes, that would fit under water conservation.
Okay, as a community, we have to identify the key needs of most folks who need to get through to an annual and prioritize those efforts. So that's very true. If we do not have a provisional license, can we complete the grant application and apply for provisional when phase 3 opens?
I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you. I don't know that we'll hold back applications. We might not be willing to process the application without a provisional license, as I'm sure it's going to be a criteria to having a complete application for a grant.
Okay. How did the state determine how much grant money could be available to Mendocino County? Because we got over 18 million out of the 100 million. And I think Humboldt got about 18 million too.
Mm-hmm.
So how was that determination made?
There was a determination made based on how many provisional licenses, unique businesses in provisional licenses a local jurisdiction had active at the time the grant was developed. There was some consideration given to where those provisional licenses are located, and Mendocino essentially kind of scored higher because the vast majority of our provisional licenses are in a region with a heck of a lot of sensitive species. And so there was additional monies allocated to Mendocino to ensure that those species and sensitive ecosystems are protected. And also an acknowledgement that because that's where these cultivators are located, their CEQA expenses can be higher oftentimes than someone who's not in a region or conducting cultivation activities in a region abundant with sensitive species. A second component that helped Mendocino County qualify for a larger pool of eligible monies is the fact that we have a local equity grant program. So that was a second qualifying point that for local jurisdictions with equity programs, they received additional funding under this local jurisdiction assistance grant program.
Yeah, when I was in those conversations with CDFA in the springtime, that we had about 15% of all the provisional licenses in the state.
Yeah.
And so for us to get 18% of the funding is appropriate, and we have the equity programs. Paul and Susan, wouldn't using some of the funds for the county EIR be promoting annual licensure for future applicants?
For future applicants, but likely for future applicants that come into the permitting process after provisional licenses are available. And the whole kind of foundation of this program is to assist those parties with provisional licenses in achieving annual licensure.
Okay. John says the county, especially county staff, should not make the determination that there is no time to adopt an EIR for a use permit ordinance. It is premature to say that process cannot be completed and applicants apply by June 30th, 2023. Additionally, without a use permit ordinance, the county will remain stuck with 10A17, which is repeatedly described as a failed ordinance. It isn't using part of the available $18 million to put in place a functional ordinance, a worthwhile use of part of these funds.
Again, I would just respectfully disagree that we don't have time to do that. And it's not just that the applicants would have to apply by June 30th, 2023. The county would have to have processed the discretionary permit to the point of issuing the staff report, making the public notification for the hearing associated with that permit. So, like, I don't know how we would possibly get through a new ordinance and environmental impact report associated with the ordinance and processing applications to the point of noticing them publicly and having a full staff report with a project description and a CEQA document for a significant number of our current applicants by June 30th of 2023. That seems unfeasible.
Well, maybe that's something we could, sit down with county council and just look at the timelines for that and see how it would pencil out. So, to Ron's point, how many qualified applicants, provisional license holders are we talking about that could take advantage of these grants? How many through the portal and how many that already have a permit?
I don't know the answer to that. So prior to the portal, I think we had around 700-ish provisional license holders that had provisional licenses for cultivation or nursery-related activities with the state. We have seen a heck of a lot of new applications through the portal, meaning new applications for provisional licenses. So I imagine that number has increased probably pretty drastically, but we haven't had a chance to go through and crunch the numbers on where we were starting with provisional licenses at starting at the point of the portal versus where we are today with provisional licenses.
How can you justify adverse action against tax-paying licensees while blatant illegal cultivation of gross scale occurs?
I don't know that the MCP is taking adverse action against tax-paying licensees. I guess I'm not necessarily understanding the question.
Okay, it's okay, we'll skip, and if Anonymous wants to clarify that later, go ahead. Maybe put out an RFP for consultants and see if any without conflicts exist.
I think that we may have to look at that. We're also looking at the RFP process that was held previously. Some RFP processes can be reopened. I have not had a chance to do a full analysis of that RFP process that occurred previously, but we may be able to just reopen that and put out a notice of invitation to apply. That would be actually probably the quickest way to add consultants to the list and do a check for conflicts. So we are looking at both a new RFP and reopening the previous one. So it very well may be what we choose to do down the road.
Okay, Tony says, once the grant is applied for and received, will you commit to creating a strategic plan for this grant and the work of MCP with input from the community?
I think that the application is likely the strategic plan for the grant. We have to do progress reporting every 6 months, including statistical benchmarking. So essentially, I think that's going to show the strategies, the timelines, and the results associated with the grant itself. I'm not sure that much more is needed. The MCP regularly has workshops and input meetings. We anticipate that we'll continue those.
Okay, we have about 15 more minutes. And so let's try to get through these quickly. And hopefully, if you have a big picture idea about the direction we should be heading with this grant, please get it out now. If we do not have an unincorporated cultivation provisional license, can we complete the grant application and apply for provisional when phase 3 opens?
I don't foresee us saying that you can't draft your grant application, but you would not be eligible for funds without a provisional license.
Okay, Hezekiah says it might be worth exploring if a consultant without conflicts might exist. It might also be worth exploring temporary staff. There might be some applicants. Maybe the state would allow flexible language that would enable a search process for a consultant. And if no consultant was identified, the funds could be redirected to pass through grants.
I also think funds could be kind of juggled in the staffing tier. So I think we can allocate funds towards consultants and then potentially look at temporary staffing to fill those slots if you still have funds in that pool, and or potentially looking at overtime for staff that's on the payroll or salaried with the county. We are, as I mentioned a number of times, exploring not just consultants without conflicts, but also if we have consultants that have conflicts, can we delegate portions of the review process and or the kind of application administration process to consultants so that we can utilize our seasoned planners to conduct the actual final review itself. So we are looking at all sorts of staffing options and consultant options.
Okay, Anonymous says no matching funds. And Mo says, will there be a website so that there can be an easy way to apply for the grant as an applicant? Do we need to request funding to create one?
I imagine there will be a website. We've been talking with IS about this and whether or not we can create a framework similar to the portal, right? That we can put the grant application into perhaps. So all of that is definitely on our mind as far as how to create ease with implementation of the grant program itself.
Okay, if our Appendix G gets accepted and we are granted an annual license during the grant process, would that make the funds unavailable at that? Would that make the funds available at that point? I think that's the question.
I think if you have an annual license and you've already gone through Appendix G, you've probably most likely finalized all of your CEQA requirements, which I believe would make the funds unavailable to you at that point.
Okay, how much of the grant money is allowed or can be used for admin for the grants?
There are no thresholds, but best practices are usually around 10% of the grant monies over the course of the 4 years. So, but there's no thresholds outlined by the state thus far.
Okay, Hezekiah says also a new ordinance or EIR isn't as needed now that Appendix G is recognized in state law. That's a big change to the policy landscape.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay. And how many folks have submitted to the portal as of today?
I don't have those numbers in front of me, but we'll be putting them forward for the CEO report, which will be part of the October 19th Board of Supervisors meeting.
So have you seen a trend upwards? Is it starting to amp up?
It's definitely starting to amp up. So we've been averaging 0 submissions over weekends, for example, and had 14 this Monday. And by today, we're at 50 some odd applications when we've been averaging about 20 a week. So lots of new applications coming in that haven't been submitted previously. So. Okay.
Many farms have submitted Appendix Gs for MCP review. Have any passed that review and are now eligible for annual state license? Has there been any success with Appendix G pathway?
There has. So everyone that we have certified has qualified the applicant or the permit holder with the county for an annual license. I did request Appendix G numbers from the planners today because it is in the criteria for the grant itself. That we explain our permitting numbers and the different pathways that applicants might be utilizing to achieve CEQA compliance. So we'll try to tuck some of that information into the CEO's report so people can get a little more information on how it's going there. We have slowed down on Appendix G reviews simply because we have our bandwidth is getting heavily depleted with the portal right now. So we have not been focusing as much time on Appendix G reviews, but we'll return to those as soon as we can close the portal and not have that time crunch on our hands or our plate, so to speak.
Okay, we're at the 9-minute mark. So how many applicants has MCP received for the job openings it is trying to hire for?
It depends on the job opening. So most of the jobs that the MCP is currently hiring for, county does a referral list. So the referral lists are like a pre-qualified pool of applicants that can apply for jobs as they open. Those job opening or referral lists are valid, I think, for 6 months. And then once those lists expire, you can recruit out to the public. So thus far, because of the way the hiring process works within the county, we have been working off of the internal pre-approved referral lists. And we will likely, after conducting the interviews for the interested parties on those lists, we'll be probably posting additional recruitment opportunities to the public to qualify to apply for jobs with the MCP. So the process is a little bit time consuming and takes a little while. Even if we get a list of a dozen people, it doesn't mean that everyone on that list is interested, amazingly so, in working in cannabis. So we might have 12 candidates on a list and only 4 to 6 of them that are interested in considering a position with cannabis, which means we would only get to interview maybe, a quarter, a third to half of who's in the referral list we've received. So that has posed some challenges. And again, we'll likely be expanding our recruitment to the public in the near future for a number of positions.
Okay, let's see. How can the application be both a general narrative and specific enough for a strategic plan?
Well, I would encourage you to look it up online. So you can go to cannabis.ca.gov. And on the front page of the Department of Cannabis Control, kind of midway down on the left-hand side, there's a link that says Department announces $100 million local jurisdiction grant assistance grant program. And then click through and look at the application materials. So, I think that will help you answer that question.
And we're going to stop with Paul and Susan's question. Okay. So let's see, please clarify the answer to a previous question. Are there 700 applicants who have state provisional licenses? And that number is likely to increase because many more people are submitting applications through the portal?
That is correct. So prior to the portal, I think when we did an audit back in, let's see when I started, so maybe early summer, June-ish, we looked at the number of applications and permit holders in the MCP, as well as the number of provisional licenses that were held by parties in the MCP. And it was right around 700. I don't have the exact number. But what we're noticing through the portal is that folks are submitting their proof of application to the Department of Cannabis Control. So I imagine that 700, that number that we identified in the early summer has increased just based on the number of applications to the state that are coming through the portal system.
Okay, and why not, Sherry writes, why not try and get an EIR done with the intention that it will be done in enough time to modify 10A17? And if it doesn't ultimately help to modify 10A17, then at least the county will have an EIR, which is really valuable going forward.
I think if there's a way to justify an EIR that might not help folks transition from provisional to annual licenses, we would be looking at that. But what we're really looking at here with this grant is how we serve the public and the MCP to make sure that There's the timely transition of provisional license holders to annual licenses. And really that transition needs to be mostly done by June 30th of 2023. So we don't have a heck of a lot of time in front of us to get folks sort of over the hump, so to speak, and into their annual licenses.
Okay, and how is Appendix G review progressing?
I would say currently slowly, because we are focused on the portal through the end of the month. And then we'll be moving back to Appendix G reviews on a regular basis.
And I said we were going to leave it at that, but I'll take Ron's. What is the downside of working in cannabis?
I have no idea personally, but I can tell you that there's a lot of planners that really want long-range planning experience. They want to work on general plan development. They want to work on housing development projects. And we don't offer that diversity for planners to have experience along, kind of more of a traditional planning arena. So I think that probably has some to do with it. And I think we still suffer from reefer madness. People still are unsure what kind of stigmas or characterization might be laid on them in their career moving forward if they are working in cannabis. I think that's a shame. And I wish it was not a consideration, but it's definitely, we hear that it's a consideration for folks.
Well, we've got just a couple minutes. I wanted to really thank Kristen and Caitlin for, spending this time with us, and having this discussion about this grant application, because it is huge. And I think that we are going to get a lot of people through to their annuals, and we just need to make it work. And I think that you can see that we're committed to making it work. I also wanted to say that there's a redistricting workshop at 6:15 this evening. And if you're in the 3rd district or the 4th district, it could have a big impact on you, because the 3rd district has like 2,500 more people than the 4th district. So there might be some serious boundary line adjustments. And so you can get that at the mendocinocounty.org/government/board of supervisors/public engagement. And that's on tonight. So really, stay tuned. And if you have any additional thoughts, please send them to me about this. I hope that we've been able to kind of paint this big picture for what the grant will look like. And I hope it's been informative to everyone. So thank you. I know people are really busy this time of year. And thank you for your participation in this. And again, thanks to Kristen and Caitlin. All right, so everyone have a good evening.
All right, thank you so much.